Okay. Okay, so it's coming now. That's good. Just needed to give it another shot.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
Good morning, Robert.
Good morning.
Robert, anybody ever call you Bob?
Nobody who wants to live.
So I know Melissa's not able to be with us today. I don't know if I'm not sure if Paul is coming on board or not. So we'll see. We'll see who we get.
Miller, I think Miller is not going to be on as a panelist. They're not feeling well. They were hoping to maybe join just as an attendee or maybe watch on Facebook or something. But
okay.
So this is not a great look on Mother's Day.
I know, right?
Well, maybe it is. Maybe we're letting them rest so we can take over.
That's right.
It's breakfast.
Yeah,
it's the Mother's Day. Yeah, Angela just said it's their day off, so it's Mother's Day off. So that makes sense.
I'm okay with that.
Well, why don't we go ahead and plan to get started here? So I will do if Tony, if you can be the liturgist, Rob, be voice of the people. I will do the New Testament reading. And
let me do the O, and I'm pretty sure. Let me do the new one. You do the O, and I'm pretty sure the O one's got some words I can't pronounce.
Well, so actually, we're just doing, instead of doing Hebrew Bible, we're doing Acts. So, do you mind doing the Acts passage, Tony?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. And Rob, you'll do voice of the people to the whole thing. Is that cool?
Okay.
All right.
And I'm pulling up Facebook since we're few in number. I figured that way I can try to help track.
Thank you.
Why don't you do the chat?
Why
don't you do the chat? I'm usually good with Facebook.
Okay. And I'll do YouTube. All right. Well, so if you're tuning in today, if you're on YouTube or Facebook, welcome to our house church. This is St. Junia. If you don't mind clicking like or put in the comments where you're watching from, that way we can count that you're with us today. So on this Mother's Day, we were just commenting that it's ironic because I think all our mothers are taking the day off. So it's just guys leading worship today. So I guess that's a good thing.
Wait till June. Just wait till June.
we should do that. We should have an all, like on Father's Day, we should have an all women worship team. Anyway, today is Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day, and our prayers are with all those for whom today is difficult also. All right. Tony, you just disappeared. You ready to go?
Yeah, man.
All right, go for it.
Today is the feast of Saint Matthias in the Church of England, Roman Catholic Church, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Matthias only appears in one place in Scripture in Acts when he is chosen by Lot to be the replacement for Judas Iscariot. Legend says that he preached the gospel in Ethiopia. Today is also the birthday of Welsh philanthropist and labor reformer Robert Owen. He was an important voice during the Industrial Revolution. He championed laws against child labor and advocated for an 8-hour workday and the slogan, 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. Greetings. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
as beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
Draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsible reading comes from Psalm 66, verses 8 through 20. All you nations, bless our God. Let the sound of his praise be heard.
God preserved us among the living. He didn't let our feet slip a bit.
But you, God, have tested us. You refined us like silver.
Trapped us in a net, laid burdens on our backs.
Let other people run right over our heads.
We've been through fire and water.
But you brought us out to freedom.
So I'll enter your house with entirely burned offerings.
I'll keep the promises I made to you, the ones my lips uttered.
The ones my mouth spoke when I was in deep trouble.
I will offer the best burnt offerings to you, along with the smoke of sacrificed rams.
I will offer both bulls and goats.
Come close and listen, all you who honor God.
I will tell you what God has done for me.
My mouth cried out to him with praise on my tongue.
If I had cherished evil in my heart, my Lord would not have listened.
But God definitely listened. He heard the sound of my prayer.
Bless God. He didn't reject my prayer. He didn't withhold his faithful love from me.
First reading is going to be from Acts chapter 17, verses 22 through 31. Paul stood up in the middle of the council on Mars Hills and said, "People of Athens, I see that you are very religious in every way. As I was walking through town and carefully observing your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription: to an unknown God, what you worship is unknown. I now proclaim to you, God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He doesn't live in temples made by human hands, nor is God served by human hands as though he needed anything, as though he needed something, since he is the one who gives life, breath, and everything else. From one person, God created every human nation to live on the whole earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their land. God made the nations so that they would seek him, perhaps even reach out to him and find him. In fact, God isn't far away from any of us. In God, we live, move, and exist. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, as God's offspring, we have no need to imagine that the divine is being, Therefore, as God's offspring, we have no need to imagine that the divine being is like gold, silver, or stone image made by human skill and thought. God overlooks ignorance. God overlooks ignorance of these things in times past, but now directs everyone everywhere to change their hearts and lives. This is because God has set a day when he intends to judge the world justly by a man he has appointed. God has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead.
This is our second reading is from John 14, 15 through 21. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I will ask the Father, and he will send another companion who will be with you forever. This companion is the Spirit of truth, whom the world can't receive because it neither sees nor recognizes him. You know him because he lives with you and will be with you. I won't leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Soon the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you will live too. On that day you will know that I am in my Father, you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them loves me. Whoever loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
When we look into the heart of a flower, we see clouds, sunshine, mineral, time, the earth, and everything else in the cosmos in it. In fact, the flower is made entirely of non-flower elements. It has no independent individual existence. It is with everything else in the universe. Just as the flower is made only of non-flower elements, Buddhism is made of only non-Buddhist elements, including Christian ones, and Christianity is made of non-Christian elements, including Buddhist ones. We have different roots, traditions, and ways of seeing, but we share the common qualities of love, understanding, and acceptance.
So we'll go to God in a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And those of you who are watching, if you would like to lift up a prayer request, feel free to do so. You can do that in the comments, or you can put it in the, if you're streaming on Facebook or YouTube, you can put it in the comments there. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, who is like a mother to us, we give you thanks for bringing us into existence and for nurturing us. We give you thanks for your tender love for us. We give you thanks for the human communities in which we find ourselves that take care of us. We lift up to you all those who are struggling with today, whose mothers have died or who have experienced trauma from parents. We lift up to you those who are struggling for other reasons, struggling because they are in the midst of poverty or war. We give you thanks that you are a rescuer who, like a mother, comes to us, surrounds us with your love, protects us under the shadow of your wings. We are grateful for all the parents and authority figures and leaders who offer us nurturing, from whom we draw life. And we take the opportunity to remember that leadership is not always about dominating or disciplining, which are also mother's roles, but about simply giving life. We're grateful for all those who serve as life givers to us, whatever their gender, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever their relation, strangers, mentors, and teachers. We ask that you'll be with all those who are calling out to you today, that like a mother, you will kiss our wounds, you will dry our tears, you will provide us a safe place to attach. We hope that you will be like our roots that connect us to a place, give us security to roam and explore, that you also give us wings, that we may be free, that we may grow into the people you created us to be. I invite those of you who are listening, if you're on Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube, if you would like to lift up a prayer request, feel free to do so in the chat or the comments.
For those awaiting diagnosis, information about their conditions, and for those with ongoing health conditions, Lord, hear our prayer. For healing for Miller, Lord, hear our prayer. And for safe travels for Miller's parents this week, Lord, hear our prayer.
Traveling mercies for all those who are traveling on Mother's Day, including Melissa and others.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Well, Shirley Fumby.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the family of Harold Wicks.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Barbara Billups.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For transgender parents and the parents with transgender kids.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For parents with graduating seniors, we are not okay.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all the prayers that we lift up, that we put into words, and for the prayers we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we join with Jesus in the prayer that he taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your name come, let your reign come, let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today. And forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I wanted to share that this New Testament passage, the one from Acts, the story that Tony read, is really one of my favorite stories in the New Testament, because it shows a very different way of spreading the good news than most of us are used to. I don't know about you. I grew up in the South, so evangelism here always meant the hard sell. As you're driving down the road, you see the billboard. If you're on the way to Montgomery, you've probably seen the one that says, "Go to church or the devil will get you." Classic billboards, been around for decades. You can buy little fridge magnets with it. I mean, it's just an icon. That's really kind of the tamest one around. These days, you'll see ones that really are about hellfire and damnation. Like this is that hard sell. You want to be part of the club because the club gets saved. Everyone outside the club's going to hell. That's the message. And if you tuned into St. Junia, you know I'm not a fan of that theology. I'm not a fan of that strategy either. Like, even if the theology was right, what a terrible strategy, right? I mean, if you actually believe in a kind of vindictive God that's going to be like, all right, I've got this tiny little group of people that's saved and all the rest of y'all going to hell, then like really the worst thing you could do would be to turn people off to your message by, telling them they're going to hell, right? So you'd want to be a lot more invitational. So you wouldn't be standing in the mall passing out tracts. You would be doing everything you can to persuade people, if you really love them, about all the good stuff, all the selling points of your religion. Anyway, regardless, I don't believe in that theology. I don't care for that strategy. But look at what Paul does in this passage. Paul starts by complimenting his listening audience. He says, I see that you're religious in every way. Man, what an opening line. So one of the things that often we're taught, as whether we're a counselor or a small group leader, or when we're trying to encourage people to participate in something, is if someone offers an idea, you don't slam it down. You don't start by insulting people. You start by affirming what you have in common with them, right? You start by affirming the positives. And I really hear in this opening line of Paul that he's kind of struggling because he's surrounded by idolatry, and his Jewish upbringing is like evil, 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 evil. All this is evil. Idolatry is bad. Like the whole Hebrew Bible is about how awful idolatry is. And Paul gets up there and he says, I see that you're very religious in every way. Man, what a great opening. He's not condescending, though. I mean, he finds a point of relationship. And he even goes so far as to affirm a lot of things that he can find. He's a classically educated citizen of Rome. I mean, he knows Greek philosophy. He's read their plays. He quotes a playwright in here. He also quotes a poem. He's quoting their own thinkers, their own traditions. And he really tries to create a basis for having a interreligious conversation. This is how he's going to spread the good news. He says that y'all have an altar that's to an unknown God. Well, here's his in, right? Well, let me tell you about the God that you may not know. Now, Paul knows that most of the learned philosophers on Mars Hill don't believe in the children's stories versions of their own myths. All right. So if you've gone and you've read mythology, you know, there's a lot of stuff about there would be a mortal parent who would say of their child, wow, my child is as beautiful as Venus, as the goddess of love, or Aphrodite. And that was a terrible thing to say, because then the goddess would smite you because you had hubris. That was the worst thing you could have in the ancient world. Pride. Much of the ancient world's philosophy was you should know your place and don't get out of line. In fact, a lot of times when people talk about paganism in the modern world, when they speak wistfully about paganism, they don't really acknowledge the paganism that we actually have history of. They kind of create a paganism in their own heads about what they think it would be like. The reality was most pagan philosophy was that you didn't want to pray to the gods. You really wanted to stay under the radar. You did not want to draw attention to yourself. Now, if you became a devotee of a particular god or goddess, a particular divine being, you might worship at their temple. Maybe you have sort of their divine protection. But for the vast majority of people, because there were so many gods, the idea was you want to make them all happy, but you don't want to make any of them upset. You don't want to give preferential attention to one at the expense of others, because the gods are always having conflicts. You don't want to be on the wrong side of the wrong battle. Now, the philosophers, the people who wrote about the gods, tended to see them as, these are myths. These are stories. It's just a good idea not to be prideful, but the idea was all these stories point to something greater. And so most people who were pagans, or what we think of as pagans, didn't really believe in polytheism, many gods. It was more like henotheism, which is you worship one god at a time, or monolatry, right? There's kind of one god that you worship and all the others are kind of sub-gods. Take, for example, Hinduism, which has many, 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 many gods, but they are all incarnations or reflections of the one divine being. And so most philosophers, most people who would be at Mars Hill talking about this stuff, they weren't people who would be devotees of one god or another god. They weren't what we typically think of as polytheists, worshiping lots of gods. They kind of believed all these stories point us to a bigger picture. They already had an idea that we don't know everything, that there's mystery out there. There's something beyond us. And so Paul comes in and embraces that line of thinking. And what he says is, here's the unknown God. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the unknown, the divine that you don't really have, that we all kind of have pieces of, but we don't all have the full picture. Let me give you a fuller picture. And then he begins to talk about something they would have all related to. He says, God who made the world and everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth. He doesn't live in temples made with human hands. Now, they're not all going, oh, yes, he does. They're going, yeah, we agree with you. Nor is God served by human hands, as though he needed something, since he is the one who gives life, breath, and everything else. From one person, God created every human nation to live on the whole earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries of their lands. Now, just FYI, nation here doesn't mean nation state. It means ethnic group. So different ethnic groups, different peoples, different cultures, different traditions. Paul is saying God wanted there to be a diversity of people on the planet. People with different beliefs, different customs, different traditions. That's what the word ethnoi, different people, often gets translated as nations means. And then he says, God made the nations, the ethnoi, so that they would seek him, perhaps even reach out to him and find him. In fact, God isn't far away from any of us. In God we live, move, and exist. Or some older translations say we have our being, which is a very beautiful phrase. In God we live, move, and have our being. Now, that's not actually original to Paul. That's originally from a Greek poet. So a polytheistic Greek poet wrote this line: in God and this was in Jupiter, the king of the gods. We live, move, and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, he's quoting again, we are his offspring, we're his children, right? So what Paul has done here is something that is pretty radical according to today's Christianity. He has really tried to engage people who don't share his Jewish or Christian beliefs and said, look, we all believe in something that's bigger than us, that the divine is more than Venus or Venus or Mars or somebody else, right? That the divine is surrounding us. I believe it's Julian of Norwich who said that we are not just made by God, we are made of God, which again is kind of a stunning thing to hear come out of Christian tradition, right? So Paul talks about the idea that God created this diversity in order that people would search, that people would seek God and possibly find God, that there's something in the seeking that God intended. Now, typically, we typically think of seeker as kind of a modern phrasing for people who don't really ascribe to one religion or another. But seeker is the language that Paul is using here, that there is something divine or intentional about the seeking. God wants for people to seek God. That there's something about hide and seek in the divine human relationship. God creates us so that we will search for and find God, and that there's something important in the seeking. Paul continues, therefore, as God's offspring or children, we have no need to imagine that the divine being is like a gold, silver, or stone image made by human skill and thought. Again, he's not telling these people anything that they don't already know. When we talk about idolatry, they weren't thinking, oh, this is the being. They're thinking that's a symbol that stands in for the god or the goddess. He says, God overlooks ignorance of these things in times past, but now directs everyone everywhere to change their hearts and lives. The word here again is metanoia. It means to have a bigger mind, to have an expanded mind. So he directs everyone to have an expanded mind. This is because God has set a day when he intends to judge the world justly by a man he has appointed. And here he's talking about Jesus, right? God has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. Paul's idea here is he's now introducing the character of Jesus, and he's going to go on to talk about Jesus's ministry and how Jesus reflected the divine being that all these people claim they worship. But this is not, again, this is not a condescending way of spreading the gospel. This is we call this ecumenical. He's reaching across the aisle. He's saying, I don't have all the truth, you don't have all the truth, but together we have some important insights that we can share together. I use the quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, his book Living Buddha, Living Christ, because I think he puts it so well. He says that like when you look at something to try to really understand it, when you look at, he even uses the example in some of his writings about a piece of paper. You look at a blank piece of paper. If you really see it, you don't see just the piece of paper. You see the clouds from which the rain fell and watered the trees that grew to make this piece of paper. You see the trees. You see the things that made their nests in the trees. You see the worker who came and cut down the tree. You see the process it went through to become wood pulp, and that from that wood pulp, it eventually turned into paper, and you went and you got it and you brought it to your house. Like when you look at the paper in your hand, it's just a blank sheet of paper is a miracle. And from there, it will go on to eventually decompose, and it might become a new tree. We're all, as Carl Sagan says, made of star stuff. None of us exist completely independent as separate entities from anything else, right? His view is we are all connected. I am part of a universal event, something that happened that brought everything into being. And when I consider myself as part of a bigger picture, It blows my mind, right? That's the idea. Interbeing is what Thich Nhat Hanh calls it. Paul says, in God, we live and move and have our being. We are like God's children. We're not just things that were created and that we exist separately from God. We are, in a way, a progression from God. As Julian Norwich said, we're not just made by God, we're made of God. So we have this connection. God is somehow like glue, the thing that surrounds all of us, that binds everything together. This is the kind of thing that Paul is talking about. And I think probably a lot of the people listening to him would say, yeah, I can get behind that. I'm on board with that. The thing that makes this Christianity and not Buddhism and not the religion of the philosophers is that Christians say, yes, and when we look at Jesus, we see God. That's the thing. That's the thing that separates Christians from other folks. That's the thing that makes Christianity Christianity. It isn't we're the saved ones and everyone else is not. The thing that makes Christians Christians is that when we look at Jesus, we say, I see God. I see the activity of God. And that in spite of death, Jesus is still with us. Now, I don't know how we should understand resurrection, but this is the way Christians understand resurrection. Some people will say you have to believe in a historical resurrection, bodily resurrection that happened the way it's written in the Gospels. Of course, if you push on that and you say which Gospel, you're going to run into some conflicts because who was at the tomb at the resurrection? The Gospels don't all agree. Who saw him first? Paul says Peter saw him first. Gospel says Mary Magdalene saw him first. I don't know. So the idea here is that really the details are not as important for Christianity because they're not as important for the biblical authors as the fact that we see God in Jesus Christ. When we talk about us all being God's children, when we look at Jesus, we're like, he's definitely God's child. Like there's a family resemblance here. So this is the way Paul does evangelism. I wish it was the way that all Christians did evangelism. I wish it was not the hard sell. I wish it was looking for the commonalities. Because as Thich Nhat Hanh says, the things that are unique to Christianity, the thing that is most unique to Christianity is Jesus, right? That's it. It's not that Christians are more loving than other people, because we can look around the world and say that's not true. It's not that Christianity has more insight than other religions. The thing, there's commonalities. And just like a flower has interbeing with other things in the universe, Christianity has interbeing with other religions, especially Judaism, but pretty much other ones too. Now, this is not saying all religions are pretty much the same, because they most emphatically are not. But there is something here about there being something bigger than us. A couple of different models of what we are talking about when we talk about interreligious concerns. Oftentimes, people talk about there being many paths up the mountain, but one view from the top, right? So there are many paths to the top. We could take a lot of different ways to get there, but there's one view from the top. I prefer the way that Barbara Brown Taylor talks about it, saying that there's one ocean, but there's many places from which we can experience the ocean. The ocean looks different when you're standing on the shore in Ireland and when you're standing on the shore in the Gulf of Mexico. It's the same ocean. There's the same water that connects the two places. In fact, you can get in a boat and go from one to the other. But the ocean looks very different, and people's experience of it is going to be very different based on where they're located. I think Paul simply has a way of coming to Mars Hill and talking to people across difference that makes them more aware of, we're talking about the same ocean. We just have a unique perspective. So that's what I want to lift up to you. Love to hear your feedback, comments, questions, responses.
I think our perspectives are part of our problem. I love how Paul like introduced like the subject to the people, and the fact that that was the first time I think Rob put in the chat the whole like Paul inventing the ecumenical movement. Like I never really thought about that before. But again, like I said, our problems are really in our perspectives. I mean, right now we're seeing people who claim to be the best Christians on the planet because they want to stop abortion, they want to stop, but then there are horrible people in every other aspect, including that. Because like if we really have free will, then like why do you get to have free will and I don't? It's one of those things where I don't know, it's just the hypocrisy of Christianity. Like you made a comment about the things that are unique about Christianity. Like right now, I think that if we don't get a hold on this, like Christianity could be like the thing that destroys the entire planet, right? And that's not what God intended. Even when we look at most wars are started over some type of religious ideation. But like the arrogance and the fervor of North American Christianity really seems to be not in step with anything that God wants us to do. And again, that's my opinion. But you have people who have the exact opposite opinion. And it's like a battle for who's right. But that who's right is the people who are not most like Christ, is the people who amass the most power, which is what they're doing in their little cubby holes. So like it's a good message, but it's kind of scary.
Thank you for that. Rob, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was giving you a chance to, respond if you wanted to. If you're not, sure.
I thought what Tony said is good.
Okay.
I'm with you. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's really interesting. So thinking about the billboard on I-65, like, and the funny thing is this is kind of an ironically beloved landmark, right? If you're driving up 65, you look forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
It's funny to me that you can tell what people think they're selling. How about that? Right? The whole approach that some people are taking. They view the gospel as flood insurance. They think the message is you don't know that you live in a 100-year floodplain, but you do, and you need flood insurance. And yet here we see Paul, this legendary evangelist, very much not selling flood insurance. And it's funny because Paul is beloved by people who sell Christianity as flood insurance. Absolutely beloved. I think in a lot of ways they are probably more Paulists than they are Christians. But yet Paul's not selling flood insurance. And I'm interested in the roots of that misunderstanding, right? So this idea that Paul is inventing the ecumenical movement, I really like this. It's funny because, he goes to the Areopagus and it's funny. I imagine all these philosophers sitting around and like, they're waiting for him to say something that they haven't already thought of. Like his whole preamble is him sort of begging their indulgence that he's not planning to say anything crazy or super weird. Like, we're just all here philosophizing. I'm Greek trained. I can quote these people. I've read this stuff. We're all in this, there's respect between us. We're all here to philosophize, right? And then at the very end, it's, oh, by the way, God raised somebody by the dead. And that's the thing that explains what humanity is actually about.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So like, okay, now there we have our discussion starter, finally. Thanks, Paul. So what's really, really interesting to me in that is the observation he made, and you explained about ethnoi, right? I love this idea that the validity of the ecumenical approach is that God absolutely intended for the diversity of humanity to crowdsource humanity's connection with the divine. that makes an enormous amount of sense.
Mm-hmm.
That really plays well with everything that we understand about how God appears to work. I mean, with the gradual development through culture and like the natural world and physics and how things evolve, like all of it. Like God doesn't just go blammo, there we go. Like God likes things to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And so that crowdsourcing feels really, really dynamic and true to me. But yet, so here we go. Paul is saying this, and yet again, Paul's biggest fans miss it. Because what I've heard over and over again is this whole, people will reach for this idea about nations and boundaries, and it's about being anti-immigrant, and it's about like, reinforcing the power of the nation state, and it's suspicion of international cooperation, like, oh, the UN is going to come and cancel Christianity because woke blue helmets, or I mean, that goes back to the 90s, like before woke, right? But it's like,
Yeah.
oh my Lord.
Yeah.
So what it immediately puts me in mind of is this colossal contrast, because Paul here is explicitly refuting what I have heard as a popular fundamentalist understanding of the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That actually, because we go back to that story and it's all humanity, grandiose, hubristic humanity. We must confound them so they can't cooperate. And yet here's Paul inventing the ecumenical movement in the name of spreading Christianity, going to the Areopagus and basically saying, let's all talk and think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think because like if you go back to the Pentecost, which by the way, Pentecost is coming up in a couple of weeks. The day of Pentecost, you have all these different languages. It's like the opposite of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that the story is unfolding here, you have that event, which is kind of God's sign, like, hey, I'm bringing everybody back together, and this is part of the, as you said, an unfolding of a plan, and and then even the progression of Acts, they start off in Judea and then it spreads, it becomes a more and more global thing. So, and now here Paul is in the seat of learning, and he's brought the gospel to them. I think he's probably looking at this saying, yeah, this is what God intended the whole time. Yeah, absolutely. Well, something you also said reminded me that, I mean, Paul, I think, I completely understand why Paul gets a bad rap from progressive Christians, because they read the books and like, things like I don't permit a woman to teach, which Paul probably didn't write. There's a lot of stuff in there that gets attributed to Paul that probably wasn't from Paul. And in some cases, I think contextually, Paul is, especially regarding, since today's Mother's Day and this panel is full of men, I can say pretty much whatever I want and say that it's feminist, right? Because no one's, I'm teasing. So most of the leaders that Paul names are women. Like if you go through all his books, he talks about Chloe and Nyssa and Phoebe and on and on and on. I mean, like calls them by name. Most people named in Paul's letters are women. So when he's talking about leaders, it's just irrational to say, oh yeah, women should listen in submission to men. We know that's from later. That's not Paul. It doesn't make
the most fervent Paulists aren't getting Paul right.
Right, absolutely. And I think Richard Rohr makes a really good case, and David Bentley Hart makes a really good case that Paul is a universalist. I mean, his idea is that Christ is going to be all in all. I mean, that's Paul's language from his letters. And when I hear that, like the idea is, this isn't over until Christ is all in all. And that's what I hear in this passage, which makes me think this is probably pretty accurate as to what Paul said. I do think Paul is a universalist. So anyway, one of my favorite, I'm sorry, I'm getting off the topic here, but in Romans, when Paul talks about the Jews and the Gentiles and the kind of the unfolding of God's saving plan, he even says, I could wish myself in hell, basically, myself condemned, so that the rest of my people, the Jewish people, would be saved. And he even then later on talks about if some people rejecting Jesus meant that the gospel comes to the Gentiles, then how much more will it be glorious when everybody comes on board, right? So his notion is universalism, and I think that comes out here. I think Paul is not the kind of guy. He thinks God is going to judge the world, but it's going to be a just judgment. It's not going to be an oppressive judgment. Anyway. Yeah.
But like the Paulists aren't Pauling. I was like,
yeah.
When you said earlier, you made the analogy earlier about, how Christianity is some exclusive club where only a few people are gonna be saved and everybody else goes to hell. Like, that's not what Paul was saying right here. Like, he wasn't saying that it's gonna be exclusively for us and the rest of y'all are going to hell. And so, like, not only Paul is not Pauling, but the Christians aren't Christianing either. Because like, you'd be surprised the number of people don't realize that, Easter and Christmas like reflect pagan holidays. Like, you bring that up and like, oh no, that's because Jesus was born in the wintertime, with the camel. No, that's not quite. Like, and people don't. I think the biggest problem is these false teachers. Like, when you tell somebody a lie, I think about all the lies I've been told about the Bible that we have really deconstructed, my time at St. Junie. And it kind of gives you a different perspective, but you have to be open to it because we all suffer from confirmation bias. Like, if this doesn't make me feel good, then it can't be. That election definitely was not right. So, we just got to burn down the whole country because of it. But when you feed people lies like that, and not only we're doing it in popular culture right now, we've done it in religion for years. And it just closes the gap. It brings people away, one, because nobody wants to hear that. And then it really just makes it like his own horrible self-fulfilling prophecy. That, the only people going to go to heaven are cis straight white men, and the rest of y'all are going to end up in the camps in Gilead.
Yeah. Well, and can I follow up? I think that part of what you're just saying too is this passage. I want to contrast this passage where Paul is really being buddy with with his audience, and he's talking to a particular audience, and he's saying to them, "Hey, I'm like one of you guys," basically, versus the chapter 1 of Romans, which a lot of conservatives like to quote to bash gay people, when Paul says, we know that the pagans got it all wrong, and part of the reason Roman society was so decadent and so spoiled was that they worshiped these gods who did all this philandering. Like, Zeus was sleeping with everybody, and Mars was sneaking around having affairs behind his back, and so that's why Rome is like it is. And Paul is speaking very judgmentally, right, about the pagans when he's talking to his Jewish and Christian friends, right? But then when he's talking to the Athenians, he's like, I'm one of you guys, right? And I do think in Romans 1, that often gets quoted to bash gay people, Paul is really kind of being sarcastic. He's doing a rhetorical trick where he's getting on people's side so that he can flip it around, because the whole point is when he gets to Romans 2:11, he says, therefore you guys have no excuse. So, because if these guys have no excuse, you got even less of an excuse, because you have the law and you don't follow it, so why are you judging them? I mean, that's the whole point of Romans. Those first 2 chapters is he's trying to get to the place where he's saying, don't get on your high horse because you're no better than them, right? And that's his goal. So when he's with them, it doesn't, for me, there's no contradiction. He's trying to get people to understand we are in the same boat. But sometimes he uses their prejudices against them, or he knows how to quote, he knows how to talk to his audience, right, and get them on board. Anyway, it does strike me that the cis straight white men who are using Paul in an exclusive way are really falling into the trap that he's kind of laid for them.
I want to lift up a comment that Miller put in really too. They said, and this is about when we're talking about diversity. I am pleased to see that we have differences we may together become greater, some of us together, Sirach, which I think is Sirach, I think, yeah. I think that is what diversity means. And it's like interesting how they are so anti-diversity because they want this to continue to be the white dominated melting pot that we've been told that this country was for the last 200 or so years. But we are when we join up with other people, we are better. Like we are better, and it's almost like nobody wants to be better anymore. Like we just want to be pitiful and odd. Then Miller says it's to think all the way back to the Eden story. If God felt humans getting the story straight in one very specific way, why would God send humanity out to do their own thing? God could have had a literal captive homogenous audience. I was watching something. I'm literally like laughing because I was watching something the other day. It was on YouTube, it was on TikTok, and this girl, she is totally like Christianity's a bunch of bull crap. Here's why. And she very, very sarcastic way, like, hey, if God was perfect and didn't make mistakes, then why did he let Adam and Eve make a mistake? And then, so and like I'm like, let me turn this off because I can't go down this rabbit hole. But like when you think about, and again, this is the I want to say that the Bible is literal. Like this is the problem that you have with the literally translated. The Bible is translated literally. There are too many contradictions about who God is and what he does and how it affects us that it would literally drive anybody away from the church. So like it's just really interesting. Like, yeah, you knew they were gonna mess up. Why you just didn't stop them? Like, then you could have had just, two white people run the whole world.
I love the idea that like this the clear fact that from in the Eden story, Eden could have been swiftly converted into a re-education camp for Adam and Eve, and it wasn't. Like that's actually a really important normative fact about that story. Like regardless of historical value versus metaphoric value, just the fact that the story is not about immediately re-educating them is actually of huge importance.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you did, then you have the free will. You can't have the free will story. So like it's really, really messed up that that's the way that we choose to look at that. And again, it can be very off-putting.
Well, I will say, I think I appreciate y'all's discussion. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it a day today. Let's go ahead and move back to our liturgy because we don't we lack the full spectrum of
we need more diversity on this panel
in our worship. Exactly. So but I appreciate the conversation. I do want to say I think it's important. Part of the thing for Christians to recognize that we don't have a lock on things like love and virtue. And something you were saying, Tony, a few minutes ago made me remember something I've shared with people a lot, which is I have a lot more in common with a peace and justice seeking Buddhist or a peace and justice seeking Hindu or Jew or atheist than I do with a Christian who is not seeking those things. Like for me, the mystics of the tradition, the people who have made change in the world in a positive direction, regardless of what faith tradition they come from, they have something in common. And those aren't virtues that are exclusive to Christianity. We don't have a lock on those things. And that seems to me also a very Jesus-like perspective. Jesus loved talking about Samaritans, and was like, where were the Jews who were doing the right thing in this situation? Where are the Christians who are doing the right thing in this situation? Maybe you should be more like an exemplary Muslim. Maybe you should be more like an exemplary atheist. Anyway, I think those are good perspectives to keep in mind. So appreciate y'all. Let's go back to our liturgy, if it will come up.
You were
here.
saying that we don't have a lock on it. Like, I don't think we even have it in our hands at this point. Like, the one thing that you don't see from like contemporary American Christianity right now is love. Like, we just don't. It's just not something that we think important. Securing those borders and making sure guns are everywhere so the kids can kill themselves. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But no one's really talking about. I've never seen anybody talk about love other than the splinter groups like us. For real.
That's true.
All right. O fire of the Paraclete, from you the clouds issue, and let me start this over. Did I say that Paraclete right?
Yeah, Paraclete. It means comforter.
Good, because I had never seen that word before.
Okay.
O fire of the Paraclete, you the clouds issue and the air soars. The rocks have their humors, and the waters bring forth their streams, and the earth sweats out green things growing. And always you teach to learn those made happy by the inspiration of wisdom. So let there be praise to you who are proud of all praise and the joy of life, who are hope and power, honor, granting the gifts of light. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you for tuning in. If you're streaming, again, we'd love for you to just click like or comment with where you're watching from. That gives us a way to count you. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream, and folks on Zoom, stick around for just a minute more. Okay, I've stopped. All right, guys, thank you for representing. What you got going on the rest of your day?
I don't know. I think my computer may have gotten some type of virus.
You having difficulties?
I can't open any of my Word or Microsoft documents.
Oh, that's lousy.
It got this little yellow thing on it that looks like a lock. And when I open
we're still streaming, Dave. We're still streaming.
Oh dear.